in a conversation, you do not have to get them to learn everything at once. Again, the data overload, the learner vulnerability, the learner exhaustion, and the variability about what is right all play in here. So it would be unreasonable, in my perspective, in the context of a challenging conversation like delivering serious news, to expect them to learn all of it in one moment. So because of that, we deliberately choose particular moments that we want to work with them on and help them to identify takeaway points that they're going to bring forward.
I've had the fortune of watching some of these sessions. They are very intense. The word deliberate has deliberate meaning here because they're so intense. I've had the fortune of also watching some end-of-life discussion training that your group has done as well. And I am struck by how well trained. So we use professional actors and actresses from the local Chicagoland area. And I'm struck by how well trained they are. And they're phenomenal. And I'm just watching there. And as we're watching, I was watching in the room with a few other people by video remotely. And we're just crying because it's such a real situation. I mean, can you talk a little bit about how you get the standardized patient actors and actresses ready for something like this? Because I know at the end of the day, you know, I see the actor or actress leaving when they're all done, and they look physically and emotionally exhausted from having to go into the role. How do you get ready for something like that?
So first off, for the simulated patients, I just want to say that I am forever indebted to the amazing actors that we work with. And I could not do this work without their amazing skill and their amazing craft. So number one, they're the ones that are amazing and talented, and I would love to talk with them about how they do that. I'm happy to talk about what I do on my end to help support that. But I do want to acknowledge them and everything that they do. So thank you to our amazing simulated patient group that we work with. In terms of what we do on our end, first off, with all the courses that we do, we very deliberately write and choose cases that are specific to the group that we are working with. So when we are working with pulmonary critical care physicians, we have cases that are relevant to cases that they would see. We often work with leaders within their department to review those cases to make sure that, you know, from a medical perspective, they're correct, but also that these feel like those challenging cases that they see in their world that are hard for everybody. So we want to make sure that we are choosing cases that are relevant and challenging. The next one is that we work with all of the actors and train them ourselves. So what we are looking for is not necessarily, and right now I'm speaking specifically about the workshop, we are not necessarily needing them to say specific words. What we're trying to do is titrate their emotional reaction so that this feels realistic and feels challenging. So we want to make sure that, you know, when we are giving them horrible news, that they're getting upset, and we work with them to make sure that they're actually showing the emotional response that we often see at the bedside, and work with them to do that, and work with them through their character to make this realistic to their humanhood, right? And the case that we have scripted.
You said something about a workshop. So you have a workshop with the actors and actresses to train them. How long does that take?
It depends on how much we have worked with the individual actors and those individual cases. But often it's about, before we do a new curriculum, we might do a 3-hour training with the group of actors before we begin the curriculum. Now, if the curriculum is repeated frequently, we won't do a training before each workshop. It kind of depends on how frequently we have done it, how long it has been, all of those things. For our annual courses, we do a workshop before each course.
Julia, I'm in awe. So now let's talk about the psychological safety component, because here I am. I'm not even involved in the training. I'm just watching, and I'm crying like crazy because I feel like I'm in the role somehow, and I'm feeling the emotions of the standardized patient as well as the emotions of the learner. So how do you create an environment of psychological safety? And what if the scenario just happens to hit a chord where the learner or the actor actually experienced the traumatic event themselves with a loved one or a family member, or God forbid, even themselves?
Yeah, it's a great question. So a lot of time is dedicated to developing psychological safety at the beginning of all of our workshops. So actually, it's something that we acknowledge even before they begin the pre-test. We meet with them. We talk about how sometimes this can bring up challenging emotions and that we are here to support them, that overall this is something that we have found helps gain competence and confidence. So we name that up front. But then at the beginning of the workshop, before they're actually engaging in our small group role play, we have anywhere from about a half an hour to 45 minutes often dedicated just to talk about this. And we talk about, why do we hate role play? It's one of the first things that I talk about. I'm known for always going over time on how much time I spend beginning the group, because I just find the psychological safety to be so important, to allow ourselves to actually be vulnerable, to allow ourselves to try new things. It's a vulnerable situation because these are hard, sad cases, but it's also vulnerable, as we talked about, because we're getting feedback and about how we're doing. So we kind of have to acknowledge both of those things. We talk about why role play is hard, why these situations are hard. We also talk about why we do it and why actually, hey, because it's fake, it actually allows us to work on this. Because this is a vulnerable situation, guess what? We need to work on this so that when you're actually at the bedside, you feel confident and capable to be able to be with the patient in the way that you want to be. And at the end of the day, I always say, if you somehow this is hard, but at the end of the day, you can walk away from this and say, oh, it's role play, it's fake, it's not real. But when it happens at the bedside, that keeps you up at night. So I always say my hope in doing this is actually that it helps people in their real jobs and in their real lives be able to handle the gravity and the seriousness of these really challenging encounters that all physicians have to face.
I can tell you, when I'm there, it certainly doesn't feel fake, even though, obviously it's a safe environment where you can try new things and get better at the skill. And the most amazing thing is the translational outcomes that you've had from this. You've shown that if you train individuals in the simulation lab to do this with a standardized patient, that they can meet a minimum passing standard that's a competency. What is your minimum passing standard set at?
It's at 80%, and then you have to get at least a 4 out of 5 on all the scaled items as well.
So 80% is required, which is much higher than the 40 to 70% that you're seeing in the literature. And I imagine that there's a wide variation in skills at baseline assessment.
There are variable outcomes from the traditional educational models. And we see that with communication skills too, that, there is learning that can happen at bedside. It's variable and it's not enough. And in order to actually change the outcomes for the patients, the experience for the patients, the experience in our healthcare system, we need to actually raise the bar and increase the expectations that we have for our learners.
So what are your next steps? You've shown the T1 outcomes. Are there more patient care or hard patient outcomes, T2 and T3, that you may be showing in the future?
So I think there's a lot of next steps, which I'm really excited about. First off, at this time, I think one of the next big things is to look at how does this change outcomes at the bedside, as well as how does this change the outcomes for the patient. And long term, look at how does this actually change healthcare practices, cost savings, systemic improvements. We're actually beginning a pilot program with some of the gastroenterologists in our system who do a lot of the procedures for pancreatic masses, which about 85% of the time have actually been shown to lead to a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. We're actually looking at evaluating the experience of patients receiving these biopsy results to first assess what is the current standard, what is this like, and what are the current communication behaviors that we see in gastroenterologists at this time who we know have not received training on this. And actually what's interesting is that often these biopsy results are given either through MyChart, a phone call. Rarely are they actually given in person, as these are often referral centers where people have traveled for even hours sometimes to be able to go get this procedure. So we're actually implementing a telehealth encounter to actually deliver those results. What's cool about that is we can not only then assess the patient outcomes, we're looking at the trust in physician, their anxiety levels, a variety of other outcomes as well. But we can also look at the actual behaviors of the clinician when it's able to be done over a telehealth encounter. And then ultimately, hopefully, we're going to be able to then study what happens when we train these clinicians and how does that change the experience for the patient? Does that change how likely they are to follow up or other kind of long-term outcomes for those patients and those families? So I think there's a lot of next steps. There's also looking at how are skills retained. So, as we are building programs at the undergraduate, graduate, and continuing medical education level, I'm hopeful that we can begin to look at how does the mastery model help these skills translate and continue over years. We're also looking at expanding this to other types of conversations. So Dr. Wood and I are currently working on developing similar frameworks for late goals of care conversations that are often done late in the course of a person's illness, to look at, can we also expect the same educational standards for that? I think we can, but we are working on it. And then again, how does that change the experience for patients as well as healthcare practices as we continue to grow and expand that? So I'm really excited about all of the future directions that we hope to bring this in.
Yeah, I can't wait. I think your HCAP scores are going to improve when we train up everyone. And I think end of life spending that's inappropriate will probably be impacted by this in a positive way as well. Julia, this was amazing. The work you do is so much appreciated by Northwestern Simulation. Shout out to Gordon Wood, your partner in crime on this wonderful project.
And shout out to others here, Dr. Melanie Smith, Dr. Eitan Shmulevitz, Dr. Jessica Montalvo, and Vital Talk, who has really informed our work and been supportive. This is really a team and a community that we're building, and I'm so excited about where this is going in the future. Thank you so much for having me here.
Oh, it was a pleasure. So to our audience, thank you for listening today. In future podcasts, we will continue to discuss the key aspects of simulation, healthcare education with other experts in the field. Bye for now.